The lights of the America's Got Talent theater shimmered like 1,000 tiny stars, each one reflecting the electricity pulsing through the air. The audience murmured in excitement, leaning forward in their seats as the next contestant stepped into the soft glow of center stage. He looked impossibly small against the grand backdrop of LED screens and golden lights. A young Filipino boy, no older than 13, stood there in his neatly pressed Elvis-inspired outfit, white jacket with subtle rhinestone patterns, fitted trousers, and a classic vintage mic waiting just inches from his lips. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm inside him, but his eyes were steady, focused, filled with a quiet fire. The judges studied him curiously. How could this little kid command such a massive stage? Even the audience wasn't sure what to expect, but the boy didn't look intimidated, not anymore. Maybe earlier he did, pacing backstage, rehearsing the same opening line over and over while clutching his necklace for strength. Maybe when he first saw Simon Cowell walk into the studio, he felt the familiar twist of fear in his stomach. But now, standing beneath the warmth of the spotlight, facing thousands of faces and an even bigger dream, something inside him settled. He took a deep breath. This was the moment he had imagined every night in Manila, practicing alone while the city hummed outside his window. This was the moment he had seen in his dreams, where the world would finally hear the voice he spent years shaping, note by note, heartbreak by heartbreak. Every sacrifice his parents made, every late-night rehearsal, every time he was told you dream too big, it all led to, right now. A soft hush fell over the room as the music prepared to cue in, the kind of hush that doesn't happen often, the kind that feels like the world collectively holding its breath. The boy closed his eyes, letting the silence wrap around him like a blanket, and then the first chord played. A warm, rich guitar tone filled the air, the unmistakable signature vibe of Elvis Presley's era. And then he opened his mouth. The first note drifted out soft but golden, smooth yet powerful. It wasn't a shout or a burst of energy. It was a statement, a quiet, confident, beautifully controlled declaration of who he was and why he came. The sound resonated across the theater, warm enough to pierce even the coldest heart, and suddenly, everything stopped. The audience froze. Somewhere in the back row, a woman's jaw slowly dropped. In the front row, a man sat up straighter, as if he'd just been hit by a wave of nostalgia he didn't expect. A few people blinked rapidly, unsure if what they were hearing was real. The boy's voice wasn't an imitation. It wasn't a copy or a parody. It had the depth of Elvis, yes, the rich velvety timbre, the soulful vibration, but it also had something raw, something painfully human. A tremble of vulnerability, a hint of longing, the unmistakable echo of a child who sang because singing was the only way he knew how to survive. His voice filled the space in a way that seemed almost unreal. Each lyric floated effortlessly, like little pieces of his soul being carried on the music. The high notes weren't forced, they rose naturally, coated in emotion. The low notes were warm and steady, surprising everyone with their maturity. There were moments where his voice cracked just slightly, not out of weakness, but out of overwhelming honesty. Those cracks were what made people lean in, what made their hearts tighten. It was the kind of voice that didn't just sound good, it reached you. The judges exchanged glances, eyebrows raised, taken aback. Sophia pressed a hand against her chest. Heidi whispered something to Howie, who couldn't tear his eyes away from the stage. But Simon leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes unblinking. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't nodding, he was studying, deeply, intensely, trying to understand how a kid from halfway across the world could walk in and deliver a voice that could stop time. The boy didn't notice any of them. He was somewhere else entirely. In his mind, he could still see the nights he spent in his small Manila room, holding a cheap old microphone, imagining a real audience listening to him. If he closed his eyes, he could still hear his mom's voice telling him, "Anak, your gift is special, don't hide it." He could feel the warmth of his father's hand on his shoulder before he left for America, telling him to be brave. All of that emotion poured out of him as he sang. He wasn't performing, he was telling the world who he was. As the song carried on, something magical happened. The audience began to rise, not all at once, but slowly, like a wave spreading across the theater. One person stood, then another, then entire rows. No one realized they were standing. It just happened. Their bodies responded before their minds could catch up. There was something deeply moving about this tiny kid with such a massive voice, standing so still, so focused, delivering each note like a message straight from his heart. The camera zoomed in on his face, eyes slightly closed, brows furrowed in emotion, lips trembling with passion. He wasn't trying to perform. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply connecting, reaching across thousands of miles of life experiences, cultures and backgrounds, and touching people with a voice that didn't belong to someone ordinary. The audience didn't just hear him, they felt him. Some people in the crowd wiped tears from their eyes. Others smiled in awe. A few recorded the moment on their phones, whispering, "This kid is unbelievable." But most watched silently, too mesmerized to even think. The theater that once buzzed with chatter now felt sacred. And the boy on stage, trembling no more, kept singing like he was meant to be there, like he belonged, like destiny had finally arrived. When the last notes of the first verse rang out, the room stayed silent, not because they weren't impressed, but because they needed a second to breathe. The power of his voice, the purity of his emotion, it had wrapped itself around every soul in the building. This wasn't just an audition. It was the beginning of something historic. The moment the young Filipino boy slid into the second verse of his Elvis classic, something shifted in the room, something subtle, something powerful, something that would soon be remembered as the moment America's Got Talent witnessed true magic. The stage lights dimmed slightly, casting a warm glow around him, almost like the universe was framing him in gold. His voice deepened, picking up more richness, more soul, more control than anyone expected from someone his age. His hands stopped trembling. His shoulders relaxed. His expression changed from nervous to transcendent, as if he was no longer just singing a song, he was channeling something deep inside himself. It was during this exact moment that Simon Cowell's reaction began to unfold. At first, it was small, almost unnoticeable. A slight lift of the eyebrow, the tiniest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Then a long, deliberate stare, one that he only gave when something extraordinary was happening in front of him. His posture changed. He leaned in, bringing his face closer to the edge of the judging table. He didn't blink. He didn't smirk. He didn't glance at the audience or the other judges. All of his focus, every bit of his attention, was locked onto the boy like he was trying to decode a mystery. How could such a young kid deliver a sound that held the depth of someone 3 times his age? Simon had heard thousands of singers, thousands of Elvis-inspired voices, thousands of hopeful dreamers who stepped onto this stage. But this was different. This wasn't an impersonation. This wasn't mimicry. It wasn't some cute kid doing a nostalgic routine. This boy had a voice that carried history, pain, longing, love, an emotional weight that didn't make sense for someone so young. It was as if he was singing with every memory he'd ever lived and every dream he'd ever dared to believe. Simon's breath caught slightly, a barely noticeable inhale that revealed just how stunned he was. His eyes widened, then softened, then widened again, trying to process what he was hearing. He sat straighter, then leaned forward again, elbows resting on the table. For a man known for being hard to impress, the shift was enormous. Audience members near the front row noticed it first. Whispered reactions spread like ripples. "Look at Simon. He's really watching him. I've never seen that look before." The other judges noticed too. Heidi glanced at Simon, then at the boy, then back at Simon, eyebrows raised. She had seen Simon impressed, but this was different. This was a reaction she had witnessed only a handful of times. Moments where Simon wasn't just judging a performance, he was witnessing something that shook him. The boy continued to sing, unaware of the storm of emotions happening at the judges' table. His voice soared into a high note that seemed impossible, especially for someone with such a small frame. The note carried through the theater with precision, clarity, and heartbreak. It was the kind of note that made the hairs on your arms stand up, the kind that held a story all on its own. Simon's jaw parted slightly. Not in disbelief, no, it went deeper than that. It was awe, pure, unfiltered awe. He wasn't just surprised. He was moved. That one note hit something inside Simon he didn't expect. It wasn't common for him to feel emotional during a performance. He had trained himself over the years to stay neutral, objective, logical. But music like this, a voice like this, it cracked through those walls. It reached him. And instead of resisting it, He let the moment sink in. The boy opened his eyes briefly and met Simon's gaze. He didn't hold it long, just a second, but it was enough. They connected for that one moment, judge and performer, veteran and newcomer, and something passed between them. The boy saw something in Simon's eyes he wasn't expecting. Softness, vulnerability, caring. It made him sing even harder, even more passionately, as if he wanted to prove he deserved that rare expression. The audience began to react too. A wave of murmurs rolled across the room. People looked from the boy to the judges, then back to the boy. Many whispered in disbelief. Others simply stood there, mesmerized, unable to speak. The boy's smooth vibrato echoed off the theater walls, filling every corner, every seat, every heart. He transitioned into the chorus, voice lifting effortlessly, and Simon's reaction finally broke past subtlety. He shook his head once, slowly, almost in disbelief, eyes still locked on the stage. This wasn't the shake of disapproval. It was the shake of someone thinking, "How is this happening? How is this possible?" A slight smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Not a full smile, not the usual judge's grin. Something gentler, something real. The camera zoomed in on Simon, capturing the exact moment he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His face softened completely. His eyes glistened, not with tears, not quite, but with the beginnings of an emotion he wasn't trying to hide. The boy hit another powerful line, his voice cracking slightly with emotion, not out of lack of control, but because he was giving everything he had. And that's when Simon's face changed again. His eyebrows shot up, his lips parted more, his head tilted forward with interest. He blinked hard, lifting one hand off the table as if he wanted to gesture but didn't know how. It was the look of someone witnessing something historic. The audience erupted into mid-performance cheers, something that rarely happened. People stood, clapping, shouting, overwhelmed by the sheer force of the performance. But Simon remained still, frozen, entranced, absorbed. It felt like the world around him disappeared. It was only him and the boy's voice. He wasn't watching an audition anymore. He was witnessing a star being born. Sophia glanced sideways and whispered, "He's speechless." Howie nodded slowly. "That's not normal, not for Simon." The cameras captured everything. The disbelief, the wonder, the emotion rising in Simon's usually guarded expression. He leaned even closer, hands clasped together, chin resting on his knuckles, staring in total admiration. The boy's voice cracked again, this time filled with longing and soul, and Simon physically reacted with a soft exhale through his nose, as if he couldn't contain how good it was. It was rare, it was powerful, it was unforgettable. And when the boy lifted his chin slightly for the song's final build-up, eyes closed, face glowing under the lights, Simon Cowell made history in silence. He didn't move, he didn't smile, he didn't breathe. He simply listened, fully, completely, emotionally, as if he knew, deep down, that what he was witnessing was more than a performance. It was the start of something legendary. When the final note left the young Filipino boy's lips, it didn't just fade into the air, it hung there, suspended like a delicate thread connecting him to every single soul in the theater. Time seemed to pause. No one breathed, no one moved. Even the lights felt frozen in place, casting a gentle halo around the boy, as if the universe itself wanted to frame him in gold. His chest rose and fell with a shaky breath, his small hands clasped tightly around the microphone stand, and his eyes glimmered under the stage lights as he looked up, waiting, hoping, for some response. But silence answered him first. Deep, overwhelming silence. Not because they weren't impressed, but because they were stunned beyond words. It lasted only a few seconds, maybe less. But to him it felt like a lifetime, a stretch of eternity where his entire future hovered on the edge of a quiet room. His heart thudded so loudly that he wondered if the audience could hear it. His legs felt weak, his throat felt tight. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. This was the moment he had worked for, cried for, dreamed for. He wanted to smile, but he couldn't. He was too overwhelmed to do anything but breathe. Then it happened. A single clap echoed across the theater. Then another. Then a third. Suddenly the entire arena erupted, exploding into cheers so loud they shook the walls. The audience jumped to their feet in a massive standing ovation. the kind reserved for moments that become history. People screamed, whistled, waved their arms. Some cried openly, wiping tears with trembling hands. Others held their phones high, capturing the moment they knew the world would soon be talking about. A wave of energy rushed across the theater so powerful it felt almost physical. And yet, Simon Cowell stayed still, frozen, staring, studying the boy with an expression no one in that room, and no one watching at home, had ever seen on his face before. It wasn't shock anymore. It wasn't surprise. It was something deeper, something that lived beneath his usually calm, controlled exterior. His eyes softened in a way that made the audience fall silent again. His lips parted just slightly. His brows drew together, not in confusion, but in emotion. He looked like a man who had just witnessed something rare, something one of a kind, something he would never forget. The boy didn't notice at first. His eyes darted across the crowd, overwhelmed by the cheers, the flashes, the storm of applause breaking over him like a tidal wave. His chest heaved, and tears clung to his lashes. He tried to hold them back, even biting his lip, but the emotion was too big, too heavy, too powerful. A tear slipped down his cheek, catching the gold reflection of the lights. That's when he finally looked down toward the judges, and saw Simon standing. Not slowly, not casually. He stood with purpose. The audience gasped. Simon Cowell didn't stand for just anyone. In the entire history of the show, he had only risen from his seat for a few performances that eventually went on to define careers, change lives, create legends. And now, he was standing for him. The boy's eyes widened, his breath caught. His hand flew to his chest as if trying to hold in the overwhelming rush of emotion. He had watched AGT for years. He knew what Simon standing meant. It wasn't just approval, it was something bigger, something more personal. Simon's face softened into a stunned, emotional half-smile, one that looked like he still couldn't believe what he had just heard. His head shook slowly, side to side, like he was silently saying, "How did you do that? How is that voice even real?" The crowd erupted again, louder this time, fueled by Simon's reaction. People shouted, clapped, and screamed like they were witnessing a miracle. The boy covered his mouth with his hand, tears rolling freely now. His knees buckled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from disbelief. He couldn't believe it. Simon Cowell was standing for him, for a poor kid from Manila who grew up singing into a broken microphone, for a dream that once felt too big, too impossible, for a voice that came from a place deeper than talent, straight from the fire of his spirit. The camera zoomed in on Simon, capturing every nuance of his expression. His eyes were wet, not crying but shimmering with a sincerity people rarely saw from him. He leaned forward, pressing a hand against the judging table as if grounding himself in the reality of what he was about to do. And then his other hand moved. Slowly, deliberately, with complete certainty, he reached out toward the golden buzzer. The crowd screamed. Heidi gasped loudly. Sophia covered her mouth. Howie's eyes widened in shock. They all knew what was coming, and still, the moment felt unreal. The boy's heart pounded so hard it hurt. He shook his head in disbelief, whispering something too soft for the microphones to catch. The world around him blurred. All he could see was Simon's hand hovering above that single button, the button that could change everything. Simon paused for a second, looking straight into the boy's eyes, his voice soft but heavy with emotion. "I've never reacted like this," he said. And then he slammed the golden buzzer. In an instant, golden confetti burst from the ceiling, cascading over the boy in a rain of shimmering dreams. The music swelled, bright and triumphant. The crowd roared louder than ever before, the sound shaking the theater like thunder. The boy looked up, spinning slowly as the golden storm fell around him, tears streaming, hands trembling, his face glowing with indescribable joy. He pressed his hands to his face, overwhelmed, shaking with sobs that came from a place deep inside. Years of struggle, hope, doubt, and determination all exploding at once. His body shook as he cried, but his smile never left his face. Simon stepped out from behind the judge's table, walking toward the stage with a look of pure awe. The boy saw him approaching and froze in disbelief. Simon climbed the stairs and walked toward him, shaking his head with a soft smile like he still couldn't comprehend what he had just heard. When he reached the boy, he placed a hand on his shoulder. "You made history today," Simon said quietly, almost whispering so only he could hear. That was unbelievable. The boy broke down again, covering his face as Simon gently pulled him into a hug, something even rarer than the golden buzzer itself. The audience cheered even louder. The cameras captured everything, and somewhere in the blur of lights, confetti, and emotion, a young Filipino Elvis, once just a dreamer from Manila, stood on the AGT stage no longer as a contestant, but as a star.